The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. You know that quote from Albert Einstein? It really feels right for our deep dive today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're about to jump into, well, a really critical and incredibly timely geopolitical topic. We're looking at the dynamic between NATO and Russia, and crucially, the dangerous implications of underestimating an adversary. We've pulled together some honestly fascinating source material. It really challenges some popular ideas and highlights historical lessons you just won't want to miss. Our mission here is simple. Unpack these insights, give you a nuanced, clearer view of a situation that, let's face it, affects global stability.
It's interesting, isn't it, how easy it is to slip into overconfidence, especially when we're talking about big international power plays. And our sources, they really get into how a top EU diplomat's recent words about Russia might echo some pretty costly mistakes from the past.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener,
Right.
maybe you're navigating these complex global affairs for something like India's UPSC exams. Those really demand deep current affairs knowledge. Or maybe you're just incredibly curious, wanting to grasp the world's big issues. Either way, this information, it's absolutely key. We're going to boil it down, give you the essential nuggets you need to be properly informed on this vital subject. Okay, let's get into it. So to set the stage, we need to talk about Kaja Kallas. She's the European Union's top diplomat from Estonia.
Hi.
A very significant role. And she recently made a, well, pretty bold statement, grabbed a lot of attention, said quite confidently that Russia doesn't stand a chance against NATO if the alliance sticks together. That if is important. Now, this wasn't just out of the blue. It came right before a major NATO summit, a time when there's significant U.S. pressure on members to really boost their military spending. Kallas was clear. Yes, more defense spending is crucial, undeniably. But it's not enough on its own. Unity within NATO is just as important, maybe even more so, to effectively counter what she sees as the Kremlin's long-term goals.
Right. And Kallas was very direct in her warning about Russia's military buildup. Didn't mince words. She called it a long-term plan for aggression. And she backed it up with some really stark figures. Get this. Last year, Russia spent more on defense than the entire EU combined.
Wow. The whole EU?
The whole EU. And this year, it's even more striking. Russia's putting more money into defense than into its own healthcare, education, and social policy combined.
That says a lot about priorities, doesn't it? It's not just an increase. It signals a deep, almost like existential focus on military power.
Exactly. It shows a very clear strategic commitment.
So in response, the EU is trying to step up, launching initiatives to boost its own defense capabilities. There are these ambitious proposals, like raising up to $800 billion, big numbers. And they're also trying to cut through the red tape, the bureaucracy, to make it easier for Europe's defense industry to ramp up production quickly. Kallas keeps hammering this point, okay? There are diverse opinions across Europe, different priorities, but keeping citizens safe, that has to be the thing that unites them.
But here's where our source material takes a really interesting, maybe even a slightly chilling turn. It raises a core warning that Kallas's statement, while obviously meant to project strength, to show resolve, it risks making exactly the same huge mistake as figures like Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler.
And that mistake was?
Grossly underestimating Russia, underestimating its unwavering willpower, its deep, often surprising ability to strike back, even when things look utterly dire for them. And the potential fallout from getting that wrong, it's terrifying, frankly. A direct, all-out fight between NATO and Russia. That wouldn't just be devastating for them. It could trigger, well, an apocalyptic scenario for the whole world.
Right, which leads to the big question, doesn't it?
Exactly. What harsh realities might Kallas and maybe many others in the West be overlooking here?
That's what we need to dig into. Let's peel back those layers, look at those realities, because you need them for a full picture.
Yeah.
First point, Russia's army. Our sources stress it's not just big, it is, right now, one of the most battle-hardened armies on the planet. They've been fighting a massive, brutal war in Ukraine for over 3 years now. That's given their forces immense, very recent combat experience. We're talking large-scale combined arms stuff.
And it's not just Ukraine either.
No, exactly. Beyond that, Russia's been deeply involved in the Syrian civil war for years. Their air force was central, really decisive in backing Bashar al-Assad. They learned a lot there, too, about urban warfare, precision strikes.
Valuable, grim experience.
And then there's the increasing involvement of what people are calling the Africa Corps, Russia's growing footprint, proxy operations across conflicts in Africa.
Precisely. That constant engagement is key. If you look at the last decade, the Russian army has basically been fighting on 3 continents,
Yeah.
Africa, Asia, and Europe.
3 continents.
Yeah. So this isn't just about numbers on paper. It's about the unique, high-intensity combat experience they've gained in very different places.
Yeah.
This constant fighting means the army has developed this, well, almost unparalleled level of practical combat knowledge. It makes them incredibly battle-hardened. They've had to adapt tactics, learn lessons the hard way, refine things under fire. That gives them a qualitative edge that, raw numbers just don't show.
Okay, so that's the qualitative edge, the battle hardening. But what about the sheer numbers, the quantitative side? Because when you look at the stats, it seems to challenge that idea of Russian strength, doesn't it, at first glance?
How so?
Well, Russia has nearly 1.3 million active soldiers,
Okay.
but NATO, almost 3.4 million combined. That's nearly 3 times Russia's strength. On paper, that looks like a clear NATO advantage, right?
Overwhelming, maybe.
Ah, yes. The headline numbers. But here's where, as you say, digging deeper gets really interesting and really crucial. You absolutely have to qualify that 3.4 million NATO figure significantly.
Well, nearly 2 million of those soldiers are American, U.S. troops.
Right. The bulk of it.
Exactly. And only a tiny fraction of those U.S. soldiers are actually stationed, forward deployed in Europe at any one time.
Okay, so availability is an issue.
A big one. Then look at the next biggest army in NATO. That's Turkey. Nearly 800,000 soldiers. A large force. However, according to our sources, Turkey is, let's say, unreliable. You can't really count on them committing fully in an all-out war against Russia.
Why not?
Ankara plays its own game. It has this unique, quite complex understanding with Moscow on many key issues, often puts its own regional interests first. Think about this specific example. Back in 2017, Turkey bought Russia's S-400 missile defense system.
Right, I remember that. Caused a huge row within NATO.
A massive row, despite furious protests, even sanctions from allies like the U.S. Plus, Turkey has flat-out refused to join Western sanctions against Russia over Ukraine, and they still maintain strong trade ties, especially in energy. So this complicates that whole idea of a truly united front. It reveals some deep strategic splits.
Which immediately brings Kaja Kallas' emphasis on a united NATO into question, doesn't it? Our sources are pretty blunt. They basically say NATO unity is more myth than reality because of these big, long-running internal divisions that go way beyond just Turkey.
Precisely. And you see specific examples, often playing out in public. Take Greece and Turkey.
Yeah.
Both NATO members, right? But they have major ongoing border and sea disputes in the Aegean. These flare up regularly. Heated words, naval standoffs, hardly a picture of unity.
Not exactly shoulder to shoulder.
Not at all. Then you got countries like Hungary and Slovakia, also NATO members, but they've openly backed Russia on many occasions during the Ukraine war, creating obvious cracks in the alliance, making collective decisions much harder.
Yeah, that's been visible.
And even at the recent G7 meeting, you notice the leaders kind of stopped short. They didn't issue a really strong joint condemnation of Russia for its escalating attacks on Ukraine. It exposed those internal differences again. So the question of how many NATO countries would genuinely throw their full military weight into a direct war with Russia remains very debatable. Precarious, even.
Okay. Then we have to talk about the ultimate factor, the elephant in the room, or maybe the missile in the silo. Russia's nuclear superpower status. It's just the stark, undeniable fact.
Undeniable and absolutely central.
According to the latest SAPRI report, for 2025, Russia isn't just a nuclear power, it's the world's largest. It possesses, 4,309 nuclear warheads, is that right?
That's the number. A staggering number. And to put it in perspective, that's more than the U.S., France, and the U.K. possess combined.
Big those 3 combined, wow.
It's a critical point, a foundational point for understanding this whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And critically, Russia has 1,718 deployed warheads. Those are ready to go.
Ready to launch.
Ready to launch. That's more than enough to completely devastate Europe, the whole continent.
And given Russia's geography, right there in Europe, these weapons could hit European capitals in minutes. Literally minutes. No real time for defense.
Terrifying.
And there's more. Russia has a complete nuclear triad. Meaning they can launch nuclear weapons from land-based ICBMs, from submarines, SLBMs, and from strategic bombers. Land, sea, and air. It ensures a robust, redundant ability to retaliate. It's designed precisely to deter anyone from launching even a conventional first strike, because the cost would be existential. It creates this terrifying, almost unthinkable balance of power.
And as if that wasn't enough complexity, there's the China factor, a huge variable.
Huge.
If Russia actually found itself in a direct, full-scale war with NATO forces combined, our sources strongly suggest China might step in. Given their no-limits partnership with Moscow,
Yeah.
they could openly support Russia. And if that happened, if China actively started providing major economic help, logistical support, maybe even military aid to Russia against NATO, well, the implication is dire. It goes way beyond simple geopolitics. It could literally become World War III. The global consequences.
Yeah.
Catastrophic. It would change everything.
So beyond the big numbers and the alliances, Russia also has some very sophisticated conventional weapons, things that could cause massive damage even without crossing the nuclear threshold.
Absolutely.
We're talking about things like hypersonic missiles. These aren't just fast, they maneuver unpredictably at insane speeds, which makes them incredibly hard, maybe almost impossible, for even the best Western air defenses to intercept.
A major challenge to existing defenses.
And they also have potent anti-satellite weapons, ASATs, which could potentially cripple the communication and GPS systems that modern armies, including NATO's, rely on so heavily.
That's right, taking out the eyes and ears.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really fascinating here looking at the Ukraine war is Russia's apparent policy of, let's call it, strategic restraint.
Restraint, how so?
Well, they clearly have the capability to target Western intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, ISR, satellites, drones, command posts. Many advanced Western weapon systems heavily depend on that ISR for targeting, for situational awareness. But Russia has largely held back from hitting those assets directly, probably to avoid a direct fight with NATO.
Okay, so they're holding back for now.
For now. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source highlights a crucial point, this strategic restraint. It would almost certainly vanish, disappear completely, if Russia felt its very survival was on the line.
Right, if they felt cornered.
Exactly. Which brings up an incredibly important and frankly chilling question. What does history tell us about Russia's willingness to fight for survival, whatever the cost?
It tells us a lot, and it's a history that maybe doesn't get enough attention in these discussions. Think about Napoleon's invasion of Russia, 1812, catastrophic for Napoleon. Emperor Alexander, I used the scorched earth policy. As the Russian army fell back, they burned everything.
Everything useful to the enemy.
Crops, buildings, supplies, even their own cities like Moscow, just to deny resources to the French invaders. The price for their own people was unimaginable, devastating. But in the end, Russia prevailed. Napoleon's Grand Army was destroyed.
Ground down.
And the same pattern, on an even more horrific scale, repeated about 130 years later. World War II. Hitler's Operation Barbarossa.
The invasion of the Soviet Union.
Initially, the Nazis had stunning success, pushed deep into Soviet land. But once survival itself became the issue, Russia literally staked everything on its war effort. Everything.
The cost was unbelievable.
Staggering. Nearly 27 million Russians died in that war. That's about 1/5 of the entire pre-war population of the Soviet Union.
1 in 5. Hard to even comprehend.
But despite that unimaginable sacrifice, that devastation, they prevailed, turned the tide. The Soviet Red Army stormed Berlin.
Is deep part of Russia's history. Their proven readiness to risk absolutely everything for survival, to endure unbelievable suffering for the nation. It's often not fully grasped in the West, I think. It's a core part of their strategic thinking, a deep-seated survival instinct. It can be dangerously overlooked in current geopolitical maths. It's not just about tanks and missiles. It's about a national psyche forged in these existential fights.
So when you put all these pieces on the table, the battle-hardened army, the real story behind the troop numbers, the shaky nature of NATO unity, Russia's massive nuclear deterrent, the China wildcard, and this incredible, often underestimated historical will to survive. What does it all mean for you, our listener? Maybe you're studying for UPSC, trying to make sense of the headlines.
Well, look, a direct, full-scale conventional war between NATO and Russia. Yes, it could very well be fatal to Moscow in the long run. NATO has immense power. But, and this is the critical takeaway from our sources for us, Russia still holds enough power, both conventional and especially nuclear, to potentially take down the whole of Europe and maybe more with it in a final retaliatory act.
A devastating final act.
Exactly. This complex, terrifying, incredibly delicate balance of power. That's what needs to be understood, respected, navigated with extreme care. To ignore it, that would be a monumental mistake. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, that profound realization, that harsh truth about Russia's capabilities and its absolute will to survive, that's precisely what kept the Cold War cold. It's what prevented a direct hot war between NATO and the Soviet Union for over 40 years. NATO and really the whole world would be very, very wise to remember that lesson from history, or it risks repeating the catastrophic mistakes of Napoleon and Hitler, but on an unimaginably larger, potentially final scale.
That's a powerful and, yeah, sobering thought to end on. The true cost of underestimating an adversary's will to survive, it goes so far beyond just counting weapons or soldiers. How do these lessons, these nuances of power, apply elsewhere? To other global flashpoints, or even just understanding conflict more broadly? That's something really worth thinking about, exploring further on your own. We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights, whether it's for your UPSC mains current affairs prep, boosting your prelims knowledge, or just helping you feel more informed about the complex world we're all trying to navigate. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found this insightful, thought-provoking, please take a second to like this episode. Subscribe to the deep dive for more in-depth analysis like this, and please comment below any further questions or topics you'd like us to tackle in future deep dives. Let us know. Until next time, keep digging deeper.